And they've really thought about it. I think that's something I would say. I think different departments or different disciplines, it's more or less important. I think in an area, I would guess like chemistry or areas where it's more laboratory based, there's a lot more cold emails is much more part of the process, I would say, because you're sort of applying to a lab. The prof kind of runs their lab, and their lab works pretty independently of the rest of things in the university. In economics, it's a little different. It's more of a program-based discipline. So students are kind of applying to the program, not really to work with a professor. And so in economics, I would say the cold email is probably less important. It doesn't usually factor into the admissions process too much, and it really matters most if the question's like very granular, very detailed, very on point, and it's really related to the program, really related to the prof. I don't think that most cold emails factor into admissions too much in my area. I think most of the decisions are made kind of on the application. So it's more the application materials themselves.
That's actually very, very eye-opening, actually, because I realized what you said is actually factual. There are program-based disciplines and there are lab-based disciplines, and you need to know, is your program of choice a lab-based discipline where you need to like focus on cold emailing the professor, or you're just wasting your cold emails away on the professor whose admission decision for students is going to be based on the department, right? So guys, you need to be aware of your program of choice. Is it a lab-based target or is it a program-based target? So you know what to do. That's very, very detailed, and I appreciate your detailed response to that. One question that actually stood out for me was, I guess it's kind of been answered, but maybe you can add some to it, where it says, why do most professors from Canada rarely reply to cold email inquiries about joining their research group? Maybe you can add some to it.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, I think students are reaching out to try to make an effort. I think the problem is if the cold email doesn't really have much information or doesn't really have like a really fine-grained question, people want to feel like you're really engaging with them as a person and really engaging with them as kind of a researcher. I think students don't really understand necessarily what professors are looking for. Like, what are the goals of the professor, right? So the goals of the professors, they really want to train really strong students. They want to produce great graduates. They want the graduates to be really stellar. So that's really what they're thinking about, is how can I train this person to make them, put them in a really good position? And a lot of professors, when they think about, especially PhD programs, they're thinking about students who are going to also become academics, also become professors, also become leaders in their field in terms of research. So they kind of have that in their mind. And so they want to see in those early stage emails, that student has kind of that spark, had that spark of interest, that spark of ideas in the field. They're really deeply engaged. I think when the email is much more broad, just kind of like, oh, I'd love to go to your program. I heard you study this field. I'd love to study that field. It doesn't really provide much to go with. And then also, I think when you provide things in cold emails, you want to talk about some of your achievements or things you've actually done. It's sort of like, instead of say things, you want to show things. You want to show instead of say, right? If you just say, oh, I'd like this, or I'd like to do research on that, versus if you say, hey, I wrote a research paper in this area for my class, and I got really interested in this topic, and see some of the questions I thought were that came out were like this, and it seems like they connect to your research. That's much more engaging than kind of just making a statement of, I'd love to do graduate program. I think I'm going to be a great student. There's kind of not much kind of meat to engage with. So the more it's kind of directly related to things you've done or directly related to things the prof has done, I think it's going to generate more of a response. That would be my thought. So I would say, like, generally when cold emailing professors, I would say choose quality over quantity. So instead of emailing 200 professors with just kind of a form email, choose like who are the 10 or 5 people you love to work with, and then really think about why would you love to work with them? What is it about their work? What is it about their program that gets you super excited? And try to communicate that in the email. So invest some time in reading their work, invest some time in thinking about why it's exciting, or other things like that, or other students they've advised, try to see what those students have done. So I definitely would go with like more quality over quantity.
And these next questions come right, it transitions really good back to what you said, quality over quantity. Now, this person is asking, what is the recommended number of quality, to send when sending to quality number? What is the recommended number of professors that you want to contact in total? Because people talk, right? And it's like, I'm sure you guys maybe sit down in the admission committee and be like, oh, I got an email from this person. Oh, I got an email from this person, like kind of deciding the person's fate. So what is the kind of like appropriate number of professors you want to contact in total?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, I think if you're over 20 or 30, I think you're really pushing the numbers pretty high. I think if you're like around maybe 10 to 15 or something, that probably feels pretty good. But you also want to have like genuineness, right? So it's like somebody you're genuinely want to work with. So if you find 10 people you're genuinely excited about working with, that's great. If you find 20 you're genuinely excited about, and you can really write, honestly, like how you're excited about their work and you've read their work, then that's also great. So it should be like kind of those genuine connections on your side, where it's not just like a networking thing or not just kind of like trying to get admitted to school. It's like an honest, a thing of what you're excited about or what you're not excited about. And that number could be different. It could be there's only 5 people, you're excited about super a lot, or it could be there's like 25 people. But I think if you're starting to get in like 30s, 40s, or 50s, I think you might be a little bit too high, because it's hard. I mean, that'd be hard to customize, 40 or 50 emails where you've read the professor's work really carefully. You have like insightful things to say about that. You've actually really thought about the questions they're working on. I mean, that would be a ton of work. So I think, yeah, probably those numbers probably make sense.
Awesome. So guys, I hope you are jotting things down. Those of you who are currently in the live session, have your notepads, because these are gems right here. These are priceless information that you're getting directly from Professor Welly. So, like we are still on the topic of cold emails, and someone is actually saying, I would say like during the weekday, but they still want to know. They still want to know directly from the horse's mouth, which days of the week is best for sending cold emails in terms of maximizing open responses, and when granted an interview by a potential PhD supervisor, what qualities, experience, and attitudes are they generally looking for in prospective grad students?
Yeah, great questions. I mean, I think, it's funny, but you wouldn't think about it, but professors think about this too. If I send someone an email, on what day will they actually respond? So not everybody responds to my emails either. So it's an ongoing problem for everybody. But I think like Tuesdays to Thursdays, I think Monday people are digging out from the weekend. Friday they're focused on the weekend. I think like a Tuesday or a Wednesday email kind of midweek is probably the optimal time to email somebody. And that's just from my own perspective of trying to get people to respond to my emails. So that's the same thing there. I think if you have the interview, people are looking for real engagement with the work. So they want to see that you're really serious about the area. You've actually read, you've done your background work. You're not asking like very basic questions. You've actually read some of the professor's papers. You've thought about the issues in there. You're excited about them. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is they want to see that you have a lot of energy and enthusiasm. You're going to work hard. Graduate school is difficult. It's a hard process. It's easy to get discouraged, as anybody who's been through the process would tell you. And so you have to have people who are really dedicated and want to work really hard. So you want to communicate that. So you want to communicate hardworking. You want to communicate like your interests and your intelligence. You also want to be clear on what your background is. What have you been trained in and what have you not been trained in? And I think when you're coming from maybe a not so much of a research university, you haven't had the same opportunities as somebody as an undergraduate in the United States or Canada or the UK might have had. People understand that, but they still want to know, what kind of training do you have? Are you comfortable in economics? One of the things we look for is mathematics ability and preparation. So, you might not have done all the economics classes, but you've done engineering or you've done a lot of math in other ways and sort of have those transferable skills. So that would be something that we would look for that probably you wouldn't really know if you weren't targeting economics. You wouldn't think economics is very mathematical. You might think, some people think of it, it's almost like accounting, but it's actually like very, very different than just kind of a pure business discipline. So sort of having that awareness of like, what are people actually looking for in your area, kind of knowing what things they're going to want to see. And then basically, professors are trying to admit students are going to be stellar. I mean, we want to have students who can get through the program, be okay, but really they want kind of the stellar students who are going to stand out and really contribute a lot to the program and also to their lab. I mean, a lot of times, the students working in a lab, you're working on projects with the prof or for the prof, and they want to see you're going to be effective. You're going to be able to get, the research done. I think Albert Einstein said, research is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. I think that's really true. A lot of it is just hard work. It's hard effort. You have to like kind of grind through it, and you have to be motivated and dedicated trying to get to the end. And you want to see students have those kind of determination and skills to really keep pushing.
I myself was writing notes. I was like, but yeah, thank you so much for wow, guy. This is guys, I am actually taking notes myself. So please, I need you guys to keep taking notes because this is Stella. He talked about the fact that we are looking for energy, right? Enthusiasm about the professor's work, energy, bring your all. And one thing that actually stood out to me here was you don't need to be an economics undergraduate to move to economics for grad school, right? So he talked about engineering, he talked about mathematics. So please be aware that you can actually transition from what you have already to economics. So far, you have the prerequisites at hand, right? So you want to use the opportunity to talk about your prerequisite experience and all of the courses that you've taken that are peculiar for like the economics program when you want to apply, as opposed to if you don't have any economics background and you don't even have anything related to economics, and you are not even talking about the stuff that you've taken in undergrad that could actually put you in the program, right? So you want to talk about your strengths and be very, very stellar and articulate when you are having your interview. Okay, so now we are transitioning into a different batch of questions that was asked by our registered participants. And Professor Wally, they want to know, how do you successfully secure a supervisor in the sciences? So I know you were specific about like, do you want to take over this one, please?
Yeah, I think let me just be a bit more selfish before coming back to the sciences. Let me just go to the economics because that's where I'm pretty much comfortable with. And those on the platform, if you happen to be in economics, this is this is going to be very important for you. So I do have two questions from Abdurazak, which is related to the economics field in terms of how it has evolved over time. And the very first one being that how has the field of economics evolved over time, especially the trends, the research areas, and what's not. I understand you mentioned the issue of mathematics and how that has, of course, coming to, make some stuff pretty much difficult for the pure economics student. So, Prof, please, I would like to get your 2 cents on this.
Sure. Yeah, economics has changed a lot actually in my time period. I'm getting older, so I've seen like different things happen. But it's when it really started when I started, it was very mathematical, very theoretical. And what's happened is it's become very applied and very data oriented. And so data analysis is a huge part. Well, the thing that's happened is we've had this explosion of data. So we used to have just very small amounts of data from government sources and really kind of time series data almost, what's happening to the overall economy. Is GDP going up? Is it going down? Is employment going up, going down? So you kind of track that for a country. But now we have all this like micro data. We observe like different individuals, we observe different companies, and just really opens up this huge frontier to things we can do. The other thing there's also been is what's been called like the credibility revolution in economics, which is related to empirical work again. And it's really related to this question of causality. What causes something to happen? And the economy is an incredibly complicated organism. There's lots of things happening all the time. And from a policy perspective, we want to know if we change this policy, what's that actually going to cause to happen to the economy? And so how do we isolate the effect of that one particular policy from all this other stuff? And one area that really started being really big is really random assignment experiments. So we think of experiments as being a very scientific methodology. You think about medications. They have a new drug. You're trying to see if it cures people of a certain illness. So you randomly assign some people the actual medication, and you randomly assign other people the placebo, like a fake version of it. And you kind of see how their outcomes respond. And we've started doing that in economics now, especially around anti-poverty interventions. What actually really moves poverty, what things can really improve economic development. And a lot of that comes out of education. So trying to understand how does job training programs, for example, it affect people who are unemployed? What ended up happening in the United States, kind of the early stage of this research, was randomly assigning who gets the job training program and who doesn't. So you can actually figure out how much the job training program actually works. So there's been this like huge credibility revolution, this huge data revolution, and I think that's been a really exciting thing in economics. And now, the economics profession is very, very data oriented. So you do a lot of mathematical stuff early in your PhD classes, but a lot of students quickly move to much more kind of applied stuff. Farouk, I'm not sure if that was your
Yeah.
experience as well.
I think yeah, I do have the same experience. And actually, the issue of causality is very strong. Now they are adding machine learning to it, which making it very, very, I mean, interesting. I guess the next question will have to do with I mean, with the same idea that things do evolve, I mean, a lot. Not only in the field of economics, I understand the field of chemistry, physics, mathematics, and whatnot. The debate has been whether you should be a bit more of a broad or wide student, that is to say, a student who loves to learn different things without going deeper into one particular, I mean, field, or is it okay for a student to be a bit more in-depth in one particular field, not necessarily having the width to it? So, per your experience in terms of these two, I mean, areas, do you who who will, I mean, succeed at the end of the day if the person is a graduate student? Is it that the student who is pretty much wide, I mean, interested in learning a lot regardless of going into the depth, or is there a student who is more interested in going too much into one depth without, I mean, expanding his breadth?
Yeah, it's a great question. So kind of breadth versus depth or specialization versus kind of more broad. Yeah, I
Mhm.
think that you're better off being specialized, I think. I think you're better off being the mastery of something. So you're kind of a world expert on X, and somebody can say, this person is a world expert on this. It gives you a much stronger position, I feel like, when you're looking for a job, than kind of being the person knows quite a bit about this, quite a bit about that. And it also helps you kind of the thing about research is there's so much research being done, there's so much to know even once you get a little broader, it's really hard for you to be kind of at the frontier of knowledge in multiple areas at one time. It's much easier to kind of be at the frontier in kind of one area and go deeper, and then you can bring in some other ideas from other spaces kind of into that thing, but you really are focused on kind of being an expert on that. So I mean, it depends a little bit on your preferences. I tend to like lots of different topics, and so I'm not really following my own advice, like I'm too broad. But I think from a grad student's perspective, it's much better if the student's graduating, you say this person is a world is phenomenal at labor economics or phenomenal at development economics or international finance, rather than this person is pretty, is good at labor, international finance, and development economics. It's kind of like this broad mix, because when people are hiring people for a job, they're usually hiring for a speciality. They're usually hiring not just for an economist, they're hiring for like a certain flavor of economist, right? They want to hire, oh, I want to hire a labor economist. Oh, I want to hire a development economist. That's how like most economics departments would hire. And so you want to fit into that rather than kind of being, they don't really know who you are, like exactly, what are you? And certainly from the academic perspective, when people are looking for assistant professor jobs at a research university, the hiring committee, this is kind of getting way beyond graduate admissions, but going out the other up the end, the hiring committee is thinking about the person's tenure process. So the way academics works is you get initially a job as an assistant professor for a certain time period, and then you go up for tenure. And tenure is a big stage of evaluation in someone's career. And in that tenure process, you need to have reference letters from the world experts in your area saying this person is a great candidate. And for those reference letters at that stage, kind of the final stage, that you want to have a reference letter that says this person is a world expert on X. So you really want to be kind of specialized. And so I think when you're graduating, people who are hiring you as a new professor are thinking about kind of the next stage of evaluation as well. And so if you're specialized, I think you're in a better situation. So that'd be my overall take. But I think at the end of the day too, like I think it's easy to get too strategic in academia. At the end of the day, you're doing this because you love learning stuff, you love talking to people, you love the ideas, and so you should focus on what you love. Because I think most academics could get paid more money going working in the financial services sector or whatever. There's other jobs you could probably get paid more, and so you should do it for the reason that you really like doing it.
Yes,
So you
please.
have to think about what you want to do. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alex. I'm
Sure.
going to take two more questions before Samira steps in. The next question I do have here, I think we've been debating about it a lot. It has to do with the issue of age. There are two schools of thoughts. One particular school of thought is if you've been you've been out of school for maybe 5 years, getting back to, I mean, graduate studies is very, very difficult because the understanding is that you are pretty much rusty. But there again, there are those who are of the view that if you are not in the mathematics related field, then this might be an advantage to you because mostly reading and you've been in the field and you've been in a process where you can really understand what's going on. But if you are in the mathematics field like economics, physics, chemistry, then you are more or less like a rusty student and they wouldn't take your application that serious. Have you come across such applications and how have you gone about it?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, I think that I find students who have some experience. It does help them in economics, I would say. It
Mm,
gives them a better, sort of a broader perspective of the world, how things work. And then also, usually students who have worked for a couple of years and coming back to a PhD, they kind of know why they're doing the PhD. They've kind of learned something about themselves, learned something about the work world, and they decide, I want to do a PhD for sure. Like this is for me. I think
mm,
one challenge we have sometimes is people just sort of default to doing a PhD because they just like getting education. They want to get more. It's like, oh, that's the highest degree. I should just keep going.
mm,
But they don't really know why they're doing it, and they don't really have the end goal in their mind. And those students sometimes struggle in a PhD program because they're just kind of doing it just automatically almost. And so I think that world that does give you some perspective. I think you're right though. If you've been sort of out of the education system for like a decade or something like that, it definitely gets harder. So I think having a couple years experience is probably valuable. And you're right, it's probably different in some of the more science disciplines where you maybe get behind. You sort of lose track a little bit of what's happening. So I think maybe more than 5 years might be a problem, but I don't think that 1 or 2 years working would
mm.
be an issue. I don't see that would be an issue.
Okay. Thank you very much. Samira, are you ready or should I take one more?
You could take one more.
Oh, okay. I guess the final question will have to do with the issue of you sidestepping master's program to go into a PhD program. I understand in the US, if you have a bachelor's degree, they can just accept into their PhD program. That's a bit unlike Canada, where you have to do a master's program before you, I mean, probably move to your PhD program. Any views on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for students who are sure they want to do a PhD, it might be better to go directly. Like at Calgary, we actually have both options. So some
Mm,
students can do a master's first and then go to the PhD if they're not really sure, or they maybe
mm,
don't have quite a strong background. You can do the master's first, and then some students can go directly from undergraduate into PhD. I think
mm,
more Canadian schools are starting that. Certainly in economics, like Toronto, UBC, Western Ontario, Queens, like a lot of the prominent schools, you can go kind of direct to PhD from undergraduate. I think from students from the continent, the master's program might also be quite valuable because
mm,
it is hard when you're coming from a school people don't know, right? So
mm,
I'm sure that a lot of students have experienced this. Canadian professors don't know all the schools in the world. They don't know which ones are good or not good. So if you kind of come into the U.S. and you get a master's degree, or Canada get a master's degree from a known school and you do really well there, then they kind of know, oh, okay, you went to University of Manitoba, did really well in the master's program there. Okay, that's great. That
mm,
really is impressive. And so there it helps to be considered. So I think it might be one way to sort of get on the radar of some of these professors is doing the master's program first. And a lot of those are funded. I mean, at Calgary, we fund a lot of our master's students. I think generally funding is harder for master's than for PhD. A lot more places would fund PhD, but and a number of Canadian schools in economics that I know of would fund master's students as well. There's differences across the provinces. Generally, Ontario doesn't have as much funding for international students as Alberta or British Columbia or other provinces. So that makes it a little harder. But yeah, I mean, I think that'd be one thing I think about is a master's program is opens up. You can also apply to both simultaneously. You could apply, for PhD programs and master's programs and see, what comes back, what your options look like. But it might be one thing if you're coming from like a less well-known university that people are not familiar with, the master's program might help.
Thank you very much. Samira, please go ahead. Thanks.
That's actually very, very, very interesting because a lot of people want to know, like, what can I just go straight from undergrad to PhD? And I think you answered very, very detailed. And those of you who are live, please take to consideration if your school is well known. And personally, I have a question here that was asking about publications. So would you say now that if you are coming from a lesser well-known, for lack of better word, university, your publications would help in a long way of having a great application? Would you say?
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I think publications would help from anywhere. It really shows that interest in research and also the ability to kind of complete projects and ask questions and answer them. I think that's huge. I think conference presentations would also be really good. I mean, I think one thing that people are looking for is, are you able to get the most out of your environment? Like whatever kind of situation you have, are you kind of able to excel in that environment and really do the most you can with the resources you have available? You're not an undergraduate at MIT, you don't have millions of dollars floating around or whatever, so you don't have those opportunities they have, which is that's just the reality. And most of us don't have those opportunities, but you might have other opportunities that pop up, and you take advantage of those. Is there a chance to work in the government to get some experience and sort of research happening there? Is there a chance to work for a professor as like a research research assistant or potentially collaborate on a project, and just seeing that students are really like motivated. And one thing I also didn't say before is like creative thinkers. I think that's another way to show that you're a creative thinker, and you're kind of pushing the way towards research. You're interested in ideas. You're trying to push the boundary of what you can do. So that's definitely something I would totally recommend. The more you can get involved in research, the more you can demonstrate is great. If there are any other opportunities to kind of do international, sometimes they have programs where you can go and be a visiting student 1 year at a university, or a program where there's an international conference and they have funding for students from the continent to go, and things like that. Anything you can do where you're showing like you're pushing as hard as you can, you're really a driven person, and you're really trying to achieve as much as you can. I think that's really positive.
Awesome. Those of us on the call, please remember, one thing I took advantage of when I was an undergrad was the study abroad program. And you correctly mentioned about like taking advantage of those opportunities where you get to learn other cultures and learn how things are done elsewhere to show you are driven, right? And in all of this actually goes a long way in your personal statement or your like statement of purpose. And you are able to like show that you've demonstrated such passion for research, such passion for higher learning and higher education and collaboration as well. Very well said. Okay, so now we are moving into the student success section of the questions. And I think you already answered the part where it says to successfully like secure. Oh no, we didn't even talk about that. Okay, so the question now is how to successfully secure a supervisor in the sciences. I know like you probably have friends in the science department and you know already what the criteria is. So those are the people who actually need to apply to a lab specifically because of funding. What would you say for student success do they need to address to be able to get in? Pretty much.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the different labs are specialized in different methodologies in different areas. So I think again, it's like kind of like finding the right fit. Find a lab that really is doing what you want to do, and also show your training is going to make you ready to go. I mean, the lab supervisor it would love to have someone show up who's driven, hungry, working hard, and also has like the knowledge that's needed to kind of jump in and contribute right away. So I think try to look at how your background matches with the lab. Try to look at some of the graduates of the lab and try to see what their background is and try to see how you fit. I think one thing students maybe don't pay enough attention to is alumni. So alumni of programs you're looking at, they provide a lot of information of what does that person look for in a student. You can see what the alumni is doing, what are the successful alumni, what was their background like, what areas of research are they in, and how does it connect to what you do. So I think sort of being aware of the alumni of labs would be another one. The other thing I'd also say is like LinkedIn is your friend. You sort of like, students are networking with professors and stuff like that, but also network with alumni from your university. If you've seen people, like Farouk and Mira, who you've been successful, people are really open to chatting with you. You'll be surprised about how much people want to give back, and they've been successful. They want to help the next generation. They want to provide some guidance and advice. So certainly if you have alumni from your university or even from your country who have gone to programs, like the ones you want to go to, try to find those people on LinkedIn and see if you can set up a Zoom call with them, see if they're willing to chat with you and give you some guidance, because they know, very much about what it's like to come from kind of your situation where you are right now to kind of where they are now. So I think looking at alumni from your school and seeing if you can connect with them and chat with them, I think is a great idea. I think when you're trying to understand different labs and different programs, like look at the alumni of those labs and those programs to see what they're doing, see if you want to do that, and then try to understand kind of the specifics of the skill set that are needed to sort of succeed in that environment.
Guys, listen, all what is being dropped here, you won't get it anywhere else. Mark your calendars and be writing down what you are hearing. LinkedIn. We cannot stress the power of LinkedIn enough. LinkedIn, right? Okay, so the next question is, what key steps or qualifications do you recommend for someone looking to make a successful transition from a professional career to a role in academia, particularly in the field of economics?
Yeah, I mean, I think in economics, a lot of people who do undergraduate in economics are not really doing much mathematical classes. That's usually something that economics would just be focused on, micro and macro, but not so much math. So I think that would be kind of a missing piece for a lot of students who've gone more in like a business-oriented route for economics, would be kind of filling in the math. I think the other thing would be any way you can get research experience, and it might not be, research as a professor or something like that. It might be doing a research project in your company or the government agency agency or something like that. So any way you can get kind of research experience. But try to learn more and try to see what are the gaps in your portfolio and how could you fill them in. I think again that might be a scenario where doing a master's degree first would be really good, especially if you're coming from a different perspective. So one example I can tell you about is one of the best PhD students I've ever had. His undergraduate was in piano. So it was in piano performance. So he's like a super creative thinker, very analytical guy, but you couldn't see it on his resume. So he did a master's degree in economics, and then he was able to fill in those gaps and qualified and did very well in the PhD program. But you wouldn't see that, when he was like an undergrad, you wouldn't think that he was going to be stellar in that. So I think like a master's program could be a great way to fill in some of those areas.
Well said, because that's very, very key to have that information. A master's degree first will be very crucial for you to have before going into the field of economics moving forward, or any other field. This is very dicey and funny, but it's still a question regardless, right? Why are Canadian degrees deemed lower than US degrees?
Yeah, it's a good question. No, I think if you look at universities in the world and you look at like Harvard and MIT and places like that, number one or number two universities, Canada doesn't have universities like that. We don't have a Harvard, MIT. And so we don't have those kind of like top 10 universities. They're not in Canada. But if you look at universities like Toronto or UBC, they're kind of in the next group of universities. So they're like top, 30 or so in the world. So I think US universities, I think, are the best in the world. I think that's probably true. But then I think Canadian universities are pretty close to that. So like Australia, Canada, UK, they're not that far off. So I think for most countries, there's like a lot of a dispersion in university quality. Not every university in the United States is Harvard or MIT. Hardly any of them are. And so if you're like at a much, much lower ranked university, like 1,000 ranked university in the United States, it's a very different education than you're going to have it at Harvard or MIT. And actually, a lot of Canadian universities would be much higher ranked than that. So I think it's like knowing the individual institution. One thing I would say, though, is like location does matter a little bit for your job outcomes. So if you want to live in, let's say, England, doing your PhD in Canada might not make that much sense, because you're gonna be kind of plugged into the Canadian labor market. You're gonna kind of get to know a lot of people in Canada. You're gonna get to know about the Canadian jobs. Same thing in the US. If you want to be working in the US, you're probably best off trying to go to the US for graduate school. So there is some aspect. It's not like you can't make those moves. It's just a little bit harder. So if you get your PhD in Canada, it'd be harder to go to the UK than probably if you got your PhD in the UK, and kind of vice versa. So there is some like local aspect there to think about, of kind of where do you want to be at the end of the day. And there's definitely a contrast between the US and Canada. Probably for most people on the continent, you don't really notice that much, but the US has probably the best jobs and those kind of things for sure. But then Canada has, like, I think in many ways a higher quality of life. So there's like a bit of a trade-off there. Canada is kind of a more relaxed country. It's very, very safe, has those aspects. The US has more dynamic, more energy, but it has these other things that kind of go with that. So there's like, there's different pieces that go with that. So I think it's kind of knowing yourself and what you want to do, and then kind of knowing what that school might help you get to.
Very well said. Very well said. This question is going to be the last for this segment of student success. And it says, how do I generally be successful in my PhD application? Tricks. Like, what can you just advise for a successful PhD?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think part of it is like being aware of kind of how competitive programs are. Some programs are incredibly competitive. If they get 1,000 applications for 50 slots, it's extremely competitive to get into. So you have to kind of be aware of like where those what the level of competition is. So you kind of know where you should apply. Usually, most students would apply to different kind of tiers of schools. You kind of apply maybe a few that are kind of reach schools. You feel like they'd be hard to get into, but maybe you could get in there. It'd be pretty tough. And then a few that are kind of solid, you feel like you have pretty solid chances of getting into. And then a few that we call like safeties. There's schools you feel pretty confident you should get into, and you feel like you would still go there. It wouldn't be your first choice, but you'd still go there if you got in. So you kind of have like to have a kind of a diversified strategy. You don't only want to apply to MIT and Harvard, right? Because that's going to put you in a really tough situation, because those are very competitive programs to get into. So you want to think about that. I think, again, like finding a good match. So if you apply to certain universities in Canada and say you want to do environmental economics as a field, there's some universities that don't offer that as a field. They don't even have that. So if you apply there and say you want to do this, but they don't do it, they're kind of like, well, they can't really do that here. So you want to think about the match. And again, I think that comes to like reading the professor's work and knowing what they do. It's probably good in your application, your statement of purpose, to mention a few different professors' names of people you'd like to work with. You're excited about their work. You think it'd be really fun to work with them. I think that would be a good thing to do on your application. And then I think also again, if you can get feedback, going back to LinkedIn, if there's alumni from your program or your school who have been successful, getting in, is there a way to connect with them to learn about what kind of schools you should target, what kind of places would be good, what feedback they might have on your application materials? I think that would also be useful. And then also reference letters, like the reference letters do carry a lot of weight. It's helpful if you have reference letter writers who have also sent students to North American universities before, because they kind of understand how it works. They kind of understand what the letter should look like. So that's also helpful, I think, there as well. And also educate your reference letters, provide your reference writers with all the information you can about all your achievements and all the things you've done. It's nice when the application package kind of fits together, like the reference letter writers are saying the same thing as your statement of purpose. It's not, your reference letter writers are not saying this person wants to do environmental economics, but the other one you're saying, I want to do financial economics. It's kind of like, what is this person trying to do? So it's nice when the package kind of like it comes together like that. So that's some advice that I could share. I think, again, looking at the alumni of different schools, like who is graduating from schools, a lot of schools post information on who their current, what they call PhD job market candidates are, and sort of see how does your profile compare to them. Are they bringing in students from the continent regularly or not? Just because you have a better sense of like what kind of universities they're looking at in terms of who they're admitting, because you can see who the alumni are and where do the alumni come from. So that also gives you more information.
Wow, this is very, very, I hope, again, I'm still specifying that you guys are writing. He literally talked about letters of recommendation, statement of purpose, what you have to have on there, LinkedIn, connecting to alumni network. Guys, I hope you are writing stuff down, because at this point, these are fantastic key tips from the professor himself, telling you how to directly have a successful PhD application packet. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Farouk to talk about our next category of application strategies, which is GPA. So over to you, Farouk.
Thank you very much, Prof. Alex, and thanks again, Samira. As Professor Alex mentioned, and I think I can't stress this enough, the idea of LinkedIn is very powerful, and I think I did mention it on our WhatsApp page that we should constantly engage on the LinkedIn page, follow the research by the professors, and make sure that we are up to date. Hopefully, through LinkedIn, we can get to meet professors, students, alumni, as Professor Alex mentioned. So please make it a point to, connect, use the LinkedIn, update your profile, be professional on it as well. Prof, please, in the interest of time, I do have 3 or 4 questions with respect to GPAs, but I'll just sum everything into one and probably give it to you. Let's see how best this will go. So, as you might have realized, the idea of GPA is very important, especially you get to see that before you even admitted into a particular program, you are supposed to get at least a second class upper or 3.0 for that matter. Others have 60 or so grade points to indicate that. Have you ever come across a situation where a student looks very promising, but the GPA is on the low end, maybe 3.31 instead of the 3.6 for the first class? He or she is having a second class upper. Have you come across a situation like this, and how best has a student kind of package his application profile to look successful and gain scholarship based on that? And then also the second idea here is the issue of you having not even meeting the 3.0 threshold. Instead of 3.0, you are getting somewhere around 2.7, which means they're not even going to admit you because of strong requirement. Is there a way around that? I think these are the 2 key pointers that I picked from the GPA questions.
Super. Thank you so much. Yeah. So the first question about, your GPA is not as high as you'd like, and maybe you feel like it doesn't really affect your ability. I think there's like 2 things you want to do. I think one is talk about other things that you bring to the table that are not reflected in GPA. So I think that's where the research, any sort of publications or research experience you have can really offset that. Another thing to mention is if there's any reasons why, if you can explain a story. So, I had an aging grandmother and I was at home and she was not doing very well and I had to manage my school and also my aging grandmother and also working at the same time. And so it really affected my schooling. You can explain that. That's something to articulate the challenges you had. Another thing to also talk about is the trajectory. Like if you have a low GPA overall, but maybe it's going up, maybe the last 2 years it was very, very strong, or the last year is very, very strong. You can talk about how you learned over your graduate program. You started off, you kind of maybe weren't ready for university, you weren't working maybe as hard as you should, but really your true ability is reflected in your last year's GPA or your kind of last 2 years of GPA. So I think that's it's something to do. It's take on board the challenge and don't just kind of ignore it. Try to use that as an opportunity to explain, your motivation and explain kind of what you bring to the table. I think the second question, if you don't have a 3.0 GPA, that could be a bigger issue, to be honest, because a lot of times that comes from the administration of the university. We're kind of not able to admit those students very often. We get a lot of pushback. So I think in that situation, if you were doing an undergraduate, maybe you want to do a master's, try to get into a master's program, where maybe you can show, okay, look, I do a master's program, I get a very high GPA in the master's program, so it helps you kind of get around that issue. But that can be a challenge. Like for our programs, the minimum GPA is 3.0, and that comes from the central university kind of authority. We can't really push back against that. And then generally, we don't have students who are very close to that. Usually our students who are admitted are much, much, much higher. We admit something like for a PhD program, we admit 15% of the applications, something like that. So it's quite competitive. These are competitive programs. And so, you have to understand kind of the level of competition. A lot of people want to go to grad school from all over the world. The benefits are really big, both personally and professionally. The return to doing a PhD is really large. So there's a lot of applicants and it's a competitive process. So if you're kind of in that situation, that's where I think, doing a master's degree or trying to find some way to kind of offset that or have another path, I think is a good idea.
Thank you very much, Prof. Alex. I think Samira, I'm done with my part.
Okay, cool.
I kind of summed in the interest of time. I don't know
Okay.
how long we can go, Prof. I think we are heading towards the hour mark. I don't know whether Prof
Yeah.
has additional 20 or so minutes to
Yeah, I can do
spare.
another half an hour. Another half an hour is no problem. Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So now we are going into specifics, which is like scholarships. The majority of all the questions we had actually was about scholarships. And just as Farouk did, I'm just gonna go ahead and summarize it so we can actually, because the live Q&A it's off the charts. It's we are trying to get the already asked ones and then do the live ones. So pretty much someone is asking, are there scholarship opportunities for just coursework graduate school applicants? I guess not non-research based now, because they are asking for scholarship opportunities that are non-research based and just coursework. Is it possible for someone to do that?
It's possible. I would say they're less available generally. They're harder. And again, kind of the programs that I know the best are the economics programs. And our master's program is a course-based program. It's not a research-based program. And for that, we do have funding available. Students are usually it's usually a position. Usually what we have is a teaching assistant position or research assistant positions that would pay, pay you a salary that would cover your tuition costs and also living costs. And you work a small amount during the year. So you typically work, I think, 20 hours a week or 10 hours a week. And basically your role is to help assist in teaching. So you would, in our situation, the professor would give a lecture and the teaching assistant would give a tutorial after to try to explain some concepts some more. So you do that. You also do some grading, kind of marking different things. Different exams and things like that students are doing. And then the other would be a research assistant where you work for a professor doing research. And that can also be a master's student. It's less common. It's usually more a PhD student, but those are also available. So yeah, I think those are available in Canada. Yeah, but I think they're definitely they're more challenging to get than a research-based position, I would say, but they're available. You can ask about that. If you email the department, you can look on the department's information set and see what they provide. Yeah, that's what I'd say.
So someone has this question about gaining full funding for their PhD in economics as an international student. And if you can suggest a couple of institutions that offer the same full funding in PhD in economics for international students specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I know
Guys,
that.
grab your pens.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that Calgary, we do at the University of Calgary, we have a lot of international students who have full funding. In Canada, like Alberta, University of Alberta also would have that. British Columbia would have that. University of British Columbia, I think Simon Fraser would have that as well. So like in Alberta and British Columbia, those would be available. There's some places in Ontario that have it, but in the other province in Canada, near Toronto area, there's some places there that have international student funding, but there's generally less. There's more regulations there on funding international students. I don't know too much about the rest of the country. I think Manitoba and Saskatchewan also would have it in economics. So I think in economics it's quite common to get full funding. It's pretty common. I don't think many students would go to do a PhD in economics without funding, because there's probably a university that would, if they have a strong profile, there's probably a university that would be interested in funding them. So I think it's quite common in economics.
Okay, so this question is talking about still on the path of like international student and full funding. Can you actually add to what the specific criteria? I know like there are departmental criteria and like university-wide criteria, but from your perspective, do you have any additional criteria that would kind of like position an international student for fully funded opportunities?
Yeah, I
That you
think
can
one thing that would matter would be one thing that might matter a little bit more is like communication skills, and English language knowledge, things like that. Because basically, if the university is going to put you in front of students where you're teaching students, they want to make sure you're going to be successful in that role. So if you come from a country that doesn't have English language universities, you want to be able to demonstrate that you have English language knowledge and things like that. I think that would be good. Communication skills where they feel comfortable, you're going to be able to teach students well, because the undergrads are paying to come to the university and they want to have a good experience, and universities think about that. I think in general, like in a research assistant, somebody who's easy to work with, and someone who's dedicated to trying to complete the tasks very, very well and complete them on time. So just trying to be like a strong worker, where you're not going to have personal issues, you're not going to have challenges that kind of slow your progress. You want someone who's going to be effective in those roles. So those would be things maybe that are a little different than purely like kind of your academic profile, but just somebody who's really easy to work with and has the right skills to be successful.
Well said, guys. Really, this is really, really like, he literally mentioned the key skill sets that you need to have when you are writing your statement of purpose and to put yourself high up there to be more competitive, right? So now I think we've kind of like answered all the questions here and there. So we want to move now to now that we have 30 minutes, let's use the last 30 minutes to answer the live Q&A. Farouk, take it away. Because I know we've answered some, so we now continue from where we stopped with the live Q&A.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prof. Again, Samira, thanks a lot for this. Prof, please, I think before I probably come to the live Q&A, I'm looking at the application package in general. You did mention the idea of your SOP, telling a story about yourself if you happen to have some pitfalls here and there, how to probably paint it and look very good. One aspect I mean, talk to students about is one CV. I don't know whether you do have some few pointers on that, what one should look out for in terms of their CV and how that can assist with the application process.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I think the CV, again, you want to focus on things that really help you stand out and things that set you up to be an effective researcher and academic person, right? So you don't really want to focus on things where you've worked in a job that's completely unrelated to research. And if you have a paper or a publication, or a conference presentation, you really want to have those emphasized. You want things that show you're a standout. Have you got any awards at your university? Have you been recognized for being a high achiever? Do you have very high GPA? Is there certain classes you've done that seem really important? Sometimes people list their classes on their CV they've done, especially key classes. Going back to economics example again, if you've done certain math classes, it right away shows that you kind of have the capability to succeed, and so you might want to highlight those on your CV. Again, if you're going for the chemistry, there may be specific classes you want to highlight. Hey, I've done this, because again, Canadian profs don't always know what the curriculum looks like at schools in different countries, and they don't really know, have you been doing like the very challenging hard classes? The other thing I'd also generally say is is that it's good to see that a student is challenging themselves. Like they're doing hard classes, like they're really pushing themselves instead of just doing these very easy classes where it's a very easy GPA. I'd much rather see a student who tried like a very hard class and didn't get quite as high of a GPA. So those are things you can mention there. You keep pushing yourself, you're challenging yourself, and you're seeking out ways to kind of like learn more and improve yourself as much as you can. So things like that you can communicate. And then there can be skills you've learned in different jobs. So you might have been working, in a retail job or something like that, but it doesn't sound very academic, but you can mention kind of what you learned, communication skills you learned, working with people, other things that are maybe, relevant for what you might do, even if it doesn't quite sound like an academic position. And then anything you can do where you can explain how you're involved in research or ideas. If you work for a government department, you might not right away know, just reading that as a professor, that you're actually doing research on a certain project. So you want to explain the research project, you want to explain what the questions were, kind of the methods you use or whatever, to really show that you learned a lot. So really try to communicate kind of your skill set and what you've learned in your different roles, and not so much focus just on like titles and things like that. And anything you've done to sort of stand out or show you have a lot of effort and enthusiasm, a lot of ability, anything you can do to show those.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof. Prof, two more questions in terms of application package before I move on to the
Yeah.
live questions. Samira, please bear with me on that. The next one has to do with the waiver. So those of us from the continent, we do have the British system. We do understand English. Everything is taught through English, but at times you tend to see that, hey, they will ask you to write a GRE to prove that you indeed you do understand English, or probably take a TOEFL or CEL paper exam to show that you understand English. Occasionally, there are a couple of waivers that we can request for. Some are being granted, others aren't. In your experience, what might be the best possibility to overcome these requirements in terms of the English proficiency? Secondly, in terms of the application fee, I understand some schools in the US do, provide waivers. Uh, in Canada, I hardly come across waivers, and I think I do tell the student that we hardly have waivers. I don't know whether you do have the same experience as me. That is to say, Canadian schools don't provide application school waivers. Yeah.
Yeah, those are great questions. Yeah, I think one challenge we have is as kind of just an academic unit within inside the universities. The university has these policies that apply to every department, and we can't really choose those. So I think like English proficiency, I think we have limited ability to recognize that. I think we have to follow the university regulations. So if they say you have to do the TOEFL exam, then we're going to have our students do that. So I think being aware of the specific policies of the university would help. And I think there's probably ways to request a waiver, but it wouldn't really come from like our department, our academic unit. It would come from like the graduate school, kind of overarching kind of university would give that. Yeah, I think application fees are a big issue. I totally understand the challenge. I don't think that we have the ability to waive them though. I don't think we can waive them. I haven't really seen that in the Canadian context. I think it's more common in the US
Yes.
context. So I'd love to waive them, but I don't know that we're able to.
Yeah. This is one of thank you very much, Prof. This is a question from Ali. I think he's asking about funding. Let me just read it directly just so you can have a better context of it. It says, do schools in Canada offer funding in the form of assistantship to students who gain admission automatically?
Yeah, it's not automatically, but a lot of students do. It's part of the admissions process. So, like for us, like all of our scholarships and funding that go to students, there's not a separate application. It's just one application. You just send in your PhD application, and that's looked at both for admission and also for funding. So there's kind of no separate process. For us, like a lot of our students who are PhD and quite a few master students do receive funding from like a teaching assistant position or a research assistant position. So it's quite common, but it's not a separate application. It's just kind of part of the same process.
Okay. This is more along the lines of physics, but I don't know, Samira, the one by Farida Anyas. Let me probably read it out, but Prof, please feel free to probably ignore that for now. I think it basically says what's the difference between an MSc program which is labeled non-admitting in the sciences, particularly physics. This is not really directly related to Prof's field, so Prof, I don't know
Yeah.
whether you know something related to those non-admitting stuff.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I know exactly what the question is, but I think like there's definitely more applied programs. There's more like MSc programs. There's like a Master
Mm,
of Applied Science or a Master of
yeah.
Science. I think the more applied programs are less academic. They're less kind of taking you towards like a PhD or a research
Mm,
track, more
mm,
taking you towards an industry or a private sector job kind of track. So it depends a little bit where you want to go. Like in the area I know of more like a Master's in Business Administration, like an MBA program. It's not really an academic program. You don't do an MBA and then try to go to a PhD. You're really going for a job. But if you did a master's in economics, it's much more of an academic track. I think that'd be kind of similar. Like a master's of applied science is not really like you're trying to go to PhD. It's like you're trying to go to a job. Whereas master's MSc would maybe more be like an academic track.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prof. This has to do with the SOPs, and I think you did mention earlier that in writing your SOP, it would be a good thing to have in terms of mentioning the professors in there, as well as how their interests align with yours or how your interests align with theirs. I think Abubakar is asking here, ideally, how many professors should we have in an SOP?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good to have a couple. I think maybe two or three is probably a good number. I think if you're trying to do all the professors in the department, that's too many. You couldn't really fit it in there. If you have just one, maybe that person is not taking new students or whatever. So I think having like two or three, there's kind of like a group there you can connect to.
Thank you very much. I think this will be my last question before handing it over to Samira. I think this will have to do with the WES evaluation, which is also an expensive venture. I remember the last time I did such an evaluation, it cost me, I think, 3 times my application fee, which is around $300 or so. So the WES basically implies that if your transcript is not being recognized by the institution, you probably might want to take it to the WES and they will have to evaluate it, tell how, I mean, the equivalence of that particular degree to that of Calgary or whatever institution you're applying to, and they can then understand the courses that you've taken, what your GPA is, and what it means in terms of the comparison. Someone is asking how relevant is this WES, and have you come across any, and is there any waivers?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, this is I don't really know this system very well. You know,
Mm,
there's some questions that probably students who are going through this would know a lot better than me, who's coming from a
yeah,
Canadian context.
yeah,
But yeah, I think that again, it's like the policies that apply at the university level. We can't
mm,
really change those too much. So
mm,
if the university says you have to have that, then we're kind of bound by that. And then we can't at kind of our level make a decision on waivers. Like we don't have that decision making authority. So
mm.
yeah, I mean, I think that it'd be nice to again not to have to do that, but I think that might be required for some places.
Yes, please. Thank you
Yeah.
very much, Samira. Please take over.
Yeah, that is actually and the WS being World Evaluation Service, it's actually very unfortunate that certain institutions don't take cheaper and equivalent, methods of evaluation, because there is Scolario that charges $9.99 for pretty much the same exact, evaluation service, but they still insist on getting from World Education Service, which is about $200. So yeah, that's the disparity, and those are the challenges that us as international students get to face in terms of like applying. But I guess it is what it is until we get better days. So Christian Potusu, if I didn't murder that name, is asking, and I think this is very interesting. They have actually engaged in a number of research activities, but they have not published any of them. Now, how do they show proof of that research experience? I know you spoke about it when you maybe have done some retailing, or they just want to know what are the key pointers you would like to see them, display or kind of like talk about these research activities that they've not been able to publish yet.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think one thing could be possible is if the person who's supervising the research could be a reference letter writer. So if that person's writing a reference letter, you can ask them to highlight that. You can ask them to discuss what is the project you're working on, what kind of things are you doing. So that would be one thing to think about. Certainly in your statement of purpose or CV, you want to mention the project you're doing. Make sure to give it a title, describe what it is, talk about kind of what are the main questions, what are the main methodologies or approaches, what have you learned so far. So I think you can really show that you're in the details, you're in the weeds of like doing research, even if you haven't published yet. So I think there's definitely ways to do that. When when you do apply, I think one thing you do want to give is give all your reference writers a package of the same information you're going to send to the university. So, you can ask even if your reference writers are not supervising that research, you can ask them to highlight the research you've done in their letters. So you give them kind of an outline. Hey, here's the research I've been doing. Here's my CV. Here's my statement of purpose. You kind of give them all that information, and you ask, like, can you highlight that in your letters? Because when it comes from the reference letter writers, it also has a lot of credibility when they say, oh, I know the student's been involved in this research project. Here's some of the things they're doing. Here's the sort of the things they're learning. So that would be another way to get it across.
Prof, people are really interested in the research projects that you're working on. And I know you said it in quite briefly in the beginning of this session, but I think now is going to be a good time for potential economic students that are on the call right now live with us to gain more insight on the kind of research that you do. So I'm going to give you some couple of minutes to kind of talk about the research that you do and how potential students can apply to your program if possible.
Yeah, absolutely. That's excellent. Yeah, and we're always looking for fantastic students. I'm always looking for fantastic students. So we'd really welcome your applications at Calgary. We have a number of students from the continent. We've had faculty from the continent. So we know that the students can be really successful with us. So that's been a great experience. In terms of my research, yeah, I think a lot about regional development in kind of an advanced economy context. So why are some regions of the country, really thriving? Why are some regions really struggling? So in the US context, we often think about Silicon Valley and the Bay Area around San Francisco is doing really, really well. Some areas in the Midwest, maybe like Michigan or areas like that, are not doing so well. So what drives those differences in performance, and how do we, as policymakers, what can the government really do to help those areas that are not doing so well? And so I've spent a lot of time working on kind of R&D or innovation. Does government funded innovation really develop those areas and develop the economy? Some people say that, government can really create growth. One thing we know about economic growth is ideas, innovation, R&D are so central to growth. But does that really come from what the government does, or does it come from the private sector? Is it more like these innovators like Elon Musk or these guys that are really driving the new innovations, or is it kind of like the government funded R&D that's like in a university or in a government lab that's really driving the economy? So I spend a lot of time trying to figure those out, and then going back to what we talked about before about causality in economics, really trying to figure out, what does that actually cause to happen? Try to sort out the effects of R&D from all these other things. So what we typically look at is historical examples where we really think we can get very strong estimates. So a recent paper that I've been working on is about sending a person to the moon in the United States in the 1960s. So that was one of the largest investments in R&D of all time. So at the peak period, there was 400,000 people involved in making like space stuff. And so what happens is we sort of study what did that do in terms of creating growth in those areas? Did it actually grow the areas that had it versus the ones that didn't? And from a kind of a perspective of getting causality, it's a great scenario because it wasn't a choice that the US really made. It was in response to the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union sent up the first satellite, Sputnik satellite, in 1957, and that really kicked off this race. And there's certain areas in the United States that were kind of already doing space-related stuff, but it wasn't called space at that time period. And so they were kind of predisposed to get a lot of money. And then other areas were not really doing space-related stuff. And so you can sort of compare and contrast what happens to those areas that had kind of space related stuff before this happened versus the ones that didn't. Did they actually grow faster? And what does that tell us about government R&D? Like, should we have more races to the moon to sort of kick off R&D and create economic growth? Or is race to the moon just about sending people to the moon? And so that's the question we're asking. And so those are the kind of research projects I do. I'm working more on kind of education. How important is education for creating innovators? Again, you can look at like Elon Musk and you could say, oh, he didn't need to go to grad school. He was already pretty successful anyway. But then at the same time, a lot of the things you learn in grad school might be really important to really push the technological frontier. So how important is kind of graduate training for creating innovators? We know that human capital is important, but we don't know if it's just raw talent and raw kind of intelligence, or is it kind of what you learn in school? So I'm working on projects around that. I'm working on a new project on agriculture, looking at agricultural development there, looking at what we call like genetic resources. So kind of what happens in agriculture is a lot of crop breeding programs are kind of based off wild organisms that you kind of bring into the crop program, and it helps you generate new crops that are more productive. And so we're trying to measure and figure out how important that's been over historical time periods. Is that really an important source? And this is really thinking about the decline in biodiversity. Right now, we're seeing a lot of changes to the environment. We're seeing a really big decline in kind of the number of species in the world. And so the question we have is that going to slow down agricultural innovation? is that really going to matter? We're going to see that in the data? So these are some of the projects that I'm working on. And the things that I look for in students is, obviously enthusiasm and energy about these projects, this kind of area. Also, like a lot of ability to manage data and programming skills are really important. So a lot of students I have work with software like Python and R. Also Stata, which is kind of an economic specific software, and the ability to program, manipulate large data sets is really important. And then kind of like energy and enthusiasm to be able to complete projects really matters. But yeah, I would definitely welcome applications for sure.
Yeah, people are still asking, I'm like, yes, you can hear him say he's accepting applicants. So please, those of you who are interested in studying, economics at Professors University, go ahead and make sure you type in or incorporate all of these tips that he has given in your application packet to make your packet really solid. I have a personal question though. Do you also research on the role of perverse incentives in policy formulation, and how does that thrive and how that drives the standard of living? Do you?
Yeah, there's definitely some research on that. I mean, there's the thing we think about for the standard of living is innovation and new ideas are so important. That's really something we really have thought about a lot. So the question is, do these kind of regulations, do they slow down innovation, or do they slow down kind of the deployment of technologies? Because sometimes you have a technology in the lab, but it can't really improve living standards unless it goes out into the field, right? Unless companies are actually using it, people are using it. So there's definitely challenges there. A lot of people are saying that the rise of kind of regulation in the United States and around the world over the last 20 or 30 years has slowed down innovation. Medical devices is one area people talk about. There's another aspect too. If you think about new medical innovation, you want to make sure the products are not going to hurt people. You want to make sure they're tested effectively, right? So you're not putting out things that are going to hurt people. So you want to have some regulation, some testing, but if you have too much of it, then you just slow down innovation. So there's definitely a debate around that. I don't think we really have a clear answer at this stage of how much that matters, but some people do see that as a problem.
Baruch, your hands was up, so maybe I'm going to.
Oh yeah, I think I do a follow-up question on Prof's work. Prof, you did indicate that having to have some skills in programming, be it Python, Stata, R, really helps. My struggle with this particular question will have to do with putting this particular skill on your CV. So at times you tend to see students writing that I do have skills in Python, and they're doing put into bracket proficient, intermediate, beginner. The question we struggle with is it okay for someone to write the level of his expertise with regards to that program, or just be silent about it? What would be your take on it?
Yeah, I think the level of expertise is better. I think one thing you would say is like, we know students coming in don't know everything. We know there's some things they've experienced or not. And there's some things they want to learn, but they haven't learned yet. That's okay. Like, you're not going to show up with a perfectly rounded, CV. That's fine. But I think the level of proficiency is good because it gives you a better sense of kind of where they are. I also think like a little bit of information on how they acquired the skills. Like, did they do a class where they learned that? Did they do an online like Udemy or a big, one of those mock type classes where they kind of did something? If you can show like you did a class or you did some way to acquire the skills, it makes it more credible. Some students with a lot of programming experience, might have like a Git page or something like that where they can show, what they've done and stuff like that. I think for most economics students, that'd be unusual. Like, we don't usually see students who are like more like computer science students, but it's more like you have some ability and some idea of kind of how it works, and you've done some data manipulation, data analysis would be helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof. This will be on a more personal note too. Prof, please, I'll kindly, probably get in touch with you on the idea of the R&D and all that. I'm also getting into that field fairly shortly. So hopefully we can have some collaboration on that end.
That would be great. Yeah, I'd love that.
Yeah. Samir,
I love the
I'm done.
connections. I'm loving the connections. This is what this program is about. Love it. Okay, guys. So we have quite a number of questions, but a lot of the questions actually, Prof did a very amazing job, like going in depth and answering more questions, even to address further questions that have been coming up. So we want to give the next 10 minutes for you guys to ask questions that has not been answered. All the questions in the Q&A box has potentially been answered in one way or the other. We have the next 10 minutes with Prof whilst we let him give us his tidbits and advice, because we literally have international students here, and we literally have people who are potentially already applying, because I did a poll a couple of minutes ago asking what stage of the application process are you on, and a lot of people are literally already applying. So this is going to be your advice to them, what to add in their SOP, what to add in their statement of the SOP, like how to request references, any advice you have for them in the next 9 minutes whilst we get more questions in the last 11th hour.
Yeah, super. I mean, I think one thing I'd say is try to connect with some alumni of your school. Try to put your application package together and talk to them. Just talk to them what you're going to talk about, how do you, and get their advice on like where you might be competitive or where you should apply. Try to connect into that. I think try to work with your reference letter writers. Try to provide them great information. So your CV, your statement of purpose, all the classes done well. Give them like talking points of things you really love them to emphasize, and then try to like make your whole package like consistent. So it's really talking, about the same thing. And then try to do good research on schools. I mean, a lot of schools might be quite famous, but they're not the right fit for you. They're not, they don't do the subjects you want, or you don't want to live there, or it's not really the right thing. So try to find like the right fit. And I would say that graduate school is much more, it's mostly about the people. It's not about the classes. So if just because they don't have this class or that class, you want to find like great advisors you really connect with, and most of the PhD program really is about your relationship with your advisors and your relationship with the faculty. So you want to find like the right people to work with. Look at the outputs, look at the labs and who is graduating from those schools. Are they doing the kind of jobs you want to do? Are they doing the kind of research you want to do? Because that's the kind of thing that happens in that school. So if they're all doing some other kind of research, they're all going to jobs you're not interested in, then maybe that's not the right thing to do. So yeah, I think there's a lot of return to like doing the research and trying to find kind of the right fit, especially when the application fees are not cheap, right? You want to apply to the right schools, and then try to connect with alumni from your school. Try to build your network and get as much advice as you can. I think that's what I'd say.
Well, thank you very much, Prof. This question actually I was trying to, but maybe you can actually speak to it for us. Someone is asking the importance of GMAT, and can it be waived when they're applying for a PhD in economics? I know you already mentioned how like some of the university requirements are already cast in stone, but can you just answer for us, like in terms of PhD in economics?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one thing that's happened is, with the pandemic and COVID, some of the requirements are kind of shifting a bit. So you should start to be up to date. Like we were using the GRE scores more, but now less people are taking the GRE test. So it's sort of changing a little. And to be honest, I don't even know where we are today at our university on that. So try to find out where they are. I think for economics, we look for the GRE, not so much the GMAT. We see the GMAT as more of like a business school test, more like for an MBA program. And so we would look to the GRE, but I don't think Canadian schools don't always require the GRE. It's not always you have to do it. It can be depending on the program, and it can be some programs look at it if you send it, but not other ones. I think, we prefer it at Calgary because, again, we don't always know all the universities. We don't always know, which universities are really strong and which ones are less strong. So the GRE helps us. It gives us more information. So we like the GRE, but we don't typically look at GMAT scores, I don't think. I think that'd be a different test for us.
So for a student who has lower GPA than 3.0, and as an application packet, they do the GRE just to show that, well, they were in a dark spot in their lives, stuff was happening and they couldn't make a 3.0, but here my GRE score is actually great. Would you say that's a good strive to take?
Yeah, I think it's a good strategy to show your GRE scores. Like, okay, this is another piece of information that shows that I'm much better than what you think from my GPA. I think one thing is still to be aware of that constraint. Sometimes the university says, hey, if the student has less than a 3.0, you can't consider that application. So if you're in that situation, we can't, even if we wanted to admit that student, we wouldn't be able to. But I think if you're like at the lower end of the GPA, like you're still over that threshold, then definitely GRE can help you kind of boost up in the chances.
Baruch, take it away.
Thank you very much, Samira. Prof, this I think getting your perspective on this question would be, amazing. Let me just recount the story. So, Samira, when I came to Canada, as an African, there's always the need for me to address someone with the same madam, blah, 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 professor. But I realized that there was a cultural shock there where the professors wouldn't allow you to prefix their name with a sir, madam, professor. They would just like to be called their first name. So that was the very first thing that came to me. I was like, oh, why are they calling them by their first name? This is so disrespectful. So this is an example to show the differences between our cultural upbringing in Africa, that's back in the continent, and what we have here in the West. From your experience, in terms of your collaboration with African students, what has been our strength, our weaknesses, what we can work on in terms of building a very strong relationship with professors?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the African students have a lot to bring to the table, and there is this cultural difference. I think one thing you speak of is right there are different names. So, in Canada, we typically have a very informal kind of relationship with students. So, one way when you email a professor and you call them professor or sir, if they write back and they sign off only their first name as kind of how they end the email, that means you should use their first name when you go back. If they sign back and say professor whatever, then you should keep using the professor title. So it's kind of like whatever they use when they respond to you, that's the kind of way you should respond back to them. And same, and so usually in Canada, it's typical that when you first get, as a student, you get to know a professor, you call them professor, but then after they say, no, don't call me professor anymore. It's once you get to know them a little bit, then it moves to like first name basis. So I think it's like, yeah, I think it's being open to those differences, like being aware of kind of, you're coming in with a certain mindset, the Canadian have a certain mindset, and kind of being open to sort of shift and sort of learning, what's different and what's not different, and taking that on board. Yeah, I think for African students, it's sort of like, be aware that you have a lot to contribute and you know a lot, and so don't be too differential. Be respectful and nice, but also be confident in what you bring to the table, and people are looking for that when you sort of like are assertive and you kind of like are honest about what you really know and what you really can contribute. Then they people appreciate that they know that. I think one thing that also is important is to kind of know your weaknesses and your strengths a little bit. So don't kind of like BS too much that, oh, I'm great in everything, I know this, and then when someone asks you a question, you're like, oh, actually, I don't know that. You want to be really honest about what you know and you don't know. And then people have a lot more confidence in you as a person when you admit you don't know something and you're not brought down by that, but you do know something else really well. And you kind of know, if you say you know something, you really mean it, instead of like you're just pretending you know kind of everything. So it's kind of like, yeah, it's kind of like the openness to the different cultures, and sort of being clear about what you bring to the table, what you do and don't know, and kind of like, yeah, looking to learn and looking to kind of improve the things that you maybe your weaknesses are, but also like get as much as you can out of your strengths.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think that's my question, Samira. Thanks.
I know I'm just going to stretch the last 2 minutes. I know Prof is a prof of economics, right? But we got a lot of science-based questions. I don't know, maybe because I'm doing chemistry, and you guys can actually direct your chemistry questions to me on LinkedIn. But in general, from your experience, what advice would you give those interested in pursuing PhD in chemistry at your university or any other science?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's knowing the labs. I think in science, the kind of like the supervisors and the labs are much more specialized. So like in economics, most universities do most areas of economics, but I think in sciences it's much more specialized. Like a certain lab is doing a very specific thing. So I think really knowing what the lab is doing and knowing kind of why you want to do it and what you would bring to the table. So I think it's really trying to find that right match. I think that's why there's much more cold emails in the sciences, because the students and professors are trying to find like the right match. And it might be, if you want to do this kind of chemistry, you should definitely not go to NYU, you should go somewhere else. Or if you want to do this kind, you should go to NYU, right? This could be like a really big difference. So I think it's like trying to understand the landscape of like what the specializations are and really try to finding the right match. That's what I would say. So it's kind of like a lot of some more reading on your side, like reading the work that's coming out of the lab, looking at the grad students, what are they doing? And then also thinking about yourself, what do you actually want to do? There's lots of different flavors of things you can do. So really trying to find like the right match, I think, is really crucial. And that usually benefits both sides. I mean, it's much better for the professor to have a student who's like genuinely interested in the area than a student who's just like, no, I want to just get a PhD in Canada. I'll just take whatever, whatever's there, right? That's not really great for anyone. And so you want to find like those genuine things where, yeah, we're both excited about this area. Me and the prof are both excited, and we can like get some new ideas and do some new stuff. So it's kind of like doing the research, doing the reading, and then thinking about kind of what you really want to do.
Guys, everyone on this call, all 79 of us or 78 of us are so grateful. Plus those who dropped, we are extremely, extremely, extremely grateful for your time. And even myself, I wrote down so many things that I'm hearing for the first time today. So I'm really grateful for your time. I'm really grateful for your detailed responses. And this is an appreciation post right here saying thank you so very much for your time and making this a reality finally. And Farouk, I'm going to let you say the concluding thanks, and then we can call it a day.
Oh yeah, thank you very much, Prof. And as I mentioned earlier, it's very rare for someone to reach out and ask how you can be of help. It's mostly the vice versa, but getting to see Professor reaching out to us, asking how he can be of help to us, and finally getting to see this day and learning a lot in terms of my experience as well. I think I've gained a lot in terms of what Prof has mentioned, especially the guide that I give to the students on the SOP end, the CV end. I think most of the questions were very, very, I mean, insightful. So from Samira and I again, Prof, we are truly grateful for your time and we truly appreciate what you've done for us. Should there be a need for hopefully additional session, we might come back to you, Prof.
Yeah, well,
I
thanks so
hope
much. This has been super fun. Like I love the energy you guys have, and I love that you're helping, the next generation, be well positioned to make progress. It's great because I think there's so many problems with these barriers. There's so much lack of information, and students want to apply, they want to be successful, but they just don't know like basic things that I know as basic things because I've been in the environment for a while. And so it's great to be able to share that information. I love the energy and enthusiasm that's coming from this group, and I really appreciate the chance to chat with you. This has been super fun, and yeah, I'd love to do it again.
Well, on that note, thank you guys so much. And thank you so much, Farouk. Thank you so much, Professor Wali. And enjoy the rest of your Sunday, guys. The recordings are going to be available on YouTube. So please, for your replays and you want to like jot things down in real time, so go ahead and do that. Subscribe to YouTube and we'll be providing you recordings there. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers. Thank you.